Their faces. That's what hits me first. Splashed across the newsfeed on my flickering laptop screen, frozen in grainy pixels, pure, unadulterated shock. Disbelief. The dawning, sickening horror of people watching their entire world implode right before their eyes. My brother Mark. My sister Sarah. Even my parents. They look like they've seen a ghost. And in a very real way they have. The ghost of a ranch they stole, the ghost of a future they thought was paved with my sacrifice. They have no idea I'm seeing this, of course. Hundreds of miles away in this cheap, anonymous room, they think I'm broken, gone, a forgotten casualty of their ambition. They don't know that this spectacular, slow-motion train wreck of their lives isn't just news to me. It's vindication. A front-row seat to karma's most brutal matinee. They sold my beloved ranch, my grandfather's legacy, my very soul, for quick cash and greedy dreams. Now, I watch from afar as they lose absolutely everything else. And the quiet hum of satisfaction deep inside me? That's the sweetest sound I've heard in years. My name is John, and for most of my life, the Double R Ranch was more than just land under my boots. It was the rhythm of my heart. My grandfather, a man who seemed hewn from the very granite of our hills, poured his life into those 1,000 acres of whispering pines, sun-drenched meadows, and the clear, cold creek that carved its way through our valley. He taught me the language of the seasons, the subtle signs of the cattle, the deep respect the land demanded and deserved. When he passed, leaving the Double R to me, the only one in the family who truly felt its pulse, it wasn't an inheritance. It was a sacred vow. I was a young man, strong and eager, and I threw myself into upholding that vow. The days bled into one another, dawn breaking as I was already out, dusk falling long after I'd finished. Mending fences that stretched for miles, coaxing life from the stubborn but generous soil, tending the herd through harsh winters and blazing summers. It was relentless. There were no exotic holidays, no shiny new trucks just for show. Every penny earned, every drop of sweat went straight back into the ranch. It was never about getting rich. It was about connection, about legacy, about the raw, honest beauty of a hard life lived well. The earthy scent of pine after rain, the contented lowing of cows at twilight, the blaze of a million stars in an unpolluted sky, those were my treasures. My small, weathered ranch house, filled with the scent of wood smoke and old leather, was my fortress. It was a profoundly good life. My family, though, they were city folk through and through. My parents had long ago traded the rural quiet for urban convenience. My younger brother, Mark, was a whirlwind of ambition, always dressed in sharp suits, his eyes constantly scanning for the next big score, the next rung on the ladder of wealth and status. I never quite grasped that hunger. My sister Sarah was outwardly softer, more prone to expressions of empathy, but she had an undeniable taste for the finer things, easily swayed by Mark's confident pronouncements and our parents' subtle yearning for a family that looked more successful on paper. They'd make occasional pilgrimages to the ranch, usually for holidays. They'd praise the scenery, give me a perfunctory pat on the back for my hard work. But I'd see their eyes cataloging the acreage, calculating potential, never truly seeing the soul of the place. It was an asset to them. To me it was everything. A chasm of understanding lay between us, silent but vast. The change started like a shift in the wind, almost imperceptible at first, then growing into a steady, unnerving pressure. Their visits became a little more frequent, their comments a little more pointed. My mother would sigh, her gaze sweeping across the pastures, and say something like, "John, this place is magnificent, but it's such an enormous responsibility for just one person." Mark, ever the opportunist, would then slide in with, "Brother, land like this is prime. There's serious money looking for parcels this size." He'd say it casually as if making idle chit-chat, but his eyes had a predatory gleam that made my stomach tighten. Sarah played her role as the concerned, gentle sister. She'd tell me they were just worried about me, all this work all alone. Maybe, she'd suggest softly, it was time to consider options. That word, options, began to echo in my mind, laced with a dread I couldn't shake. I tried to explain again and again that the ranch wasn't a burden, it was my life's work, my purpose. I tried to make them understand. But it was like speaking a foreign language. They heard the words land, value, opportunity. They never heard home, heritage, heart. The unspoken expectation that I should somehow liquidate my existence for their vague notion of collective benefit grew heavier with each visit. The first real shock, the one that scraped away my denial, came on a crisp autumn Sunday. They'd invited themselves for lunch, which was unusual enough. The conversation felt forced, skating over surface-level topics, until Mark cleared his throat with an air of manufactured gravity. "John," he announced, "we need to have a serious family discussion. About the ranch. And about your future." My father nodded solemnly. My mother twisted her napkin in her lap. Even Sarah wore an expression of troubled seriousness. My insides went cold. This wasn't a discussion. This was a planned intervention. They presented what they called a proposal. A developer, a supposed friend of Mark's, was extremely interested in the Double R. They painted visions of incredible wealth, an easy life for me, a brighter future for all of them. They framed it as an act of profound care for my well-being. But the hunger in their eyes, the barely concealed excitement, told a different story. This wasn't about my well-being. It was about their desires. I told them, my voice more level than I felt, that the ranch was not for sale. Not then, not ever. The smiles vanished. The air in my small kitchen grew thick with their disappointment, their resentment. As their cars pulled away, kicking up dust and leaving a trail of unspoken anger, a chilling question formed in my mind. Just how far were they willing to push this? After that disastrous Sunday, their campaign intensified. The subtle hints became a relentless barrage. Mark, in particular, was like a dog with a bone. He'd call constantly, ostensibly just checking in, but every conversation inevitably veered towards the developers, the staggering sums of money, the once-in-a-lifetime chance I was supposedly throwing away. He'd say things like, "Think of what you could do, John. Travel the world, invest your money, actually live a little." Instead of this. His gesture, when he visited, would encompass my comfortable, lived-in home as if it were a hovel. My parents, usually more hands-off, began to parrot his lines, though with a softer, more wounded tone. My mother would sigh into the phone, saying, "We just want you to be secure, dear. That ranch is so isolated. What if something were to happen to you out there all alone?" It was emotional manipulation dressed up as love. Sarah, the master of gentle persuasion, would call me, her voice oozing feigned sympathy. She'd tell me she knew Mark could be overbearing, but he really did mean well. And honestly, John, she'd confide, the offer they're talking about, it's life-changing. Maybe you should just properly hear them out one more time? She was expertly planting seeds of doubt, trying to wear down my resolve. Then the unsettling incidents began. I'd find fresh tire tracks near the northern boundary, a remote section few people ever went near. One morning, my heart pounded in my chest when I discovered a bright pink surveyor's stake driven firmly into the earth near the creek. I ripped it out, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and violation. A few days later, I saw an unfamiliar luxury sedan idling at the very end of my long driveway. Two figures inside were clearly studying the property through binoculars. They sped off the moment they realized I'd spotted them. Then the call started, from smooth-talking real estate agents. They'd mentioned that my family had suggested I might be considering a sale. Each call felt like another twist of the knife. My own family wasn't just talking amongst themselves. They were actively soliciting offers, inviting strangers to pick over the bones of my life before it was even dead. I confronted Mark, my voice tight with fury. "Who have you been talking to? Why are these people crawling all over my land?" He had the audacity to look offended, then quickly switched to bluster. He said he was just trying to help me, that I was too stubborn, too blind to see what was good for me. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. He truly believed his desire for a quick profit outweighed my entire existence on that ranch. A constant, gnawing anxiety became my companion. The peace of the Double R was shattered, replaced by a feeling of being hunted, besieged in my own home. I started double-checking the locks on my doors at night, something I'd never felt the need to do before. The unease was no longer a vague feeling, it was a certainty. They were relentless. They would not stop. The pressure cooker finally blew on a cold, late autumn evening. I was out in the barn, tending to a sick calf, the only sounds the rustle of hay and the calf's soft breathing. Then the crunch of tires on gravel cut through the night. Not one set of headlights, but three snaking their way up my long driveway. Mark, Sarah, my parents, and two men in expensive suits I'd never laid eyes on before. My stomach plummeted. This was it. They cornered me in my own kitchen. The two strangers, clearly developers, wasted no time spreading glossy brochures and architectural renderings across my worn, scarred wooden table. Mark, his face alight with a kind of smug, predatory excitement, made the introductions. "John," he said, his voice booming with false bonhomie, "this is Mr. Henderson and Mr. Davies. They have a revised offer for the Double R. A very, very generous offer." The numbers they quoted were indeed staggering, enough to turn anyone's head. They talked of luxury estates, a championship golf course, a spa resort. They painted a dazzling picture of progress and prosperity, all the while systematically proposing the annihilation of every memory, every blade of grass, every stone that held the history of my family and my life. I listened, my face carefully blank, while inside a hurricane of grief, rage, and betrayal raged. When their slick, soulless presentation finally ground to a halt, all eyes fixed on me, expectant, triumphant. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the charged air. "The answer is still no. This ranch is not for sale. Not for any price." Mark's face twisted into a mask of fury. "Don't be an idiot, John," he spat. "This is more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes of breaking your back in this dirt." My father added his weight, his voice heavy with disapproval. "Son," he said, "sometimes you have to put sentiment aside and be practical." My mother began to weep, real tears this time. "We're only thinking of you," she sobbed. "Of all of us." Sarah placed a hand on my arm, her touch feeling like a searing brand. "Please, John," she pleaded, her eyes wide. "Just sign the papers. It's for the best. For everyone." Then Mr. Henderson, one of the developers, cleared his throat, a smug little sound. "Well, Mr. Miller," he said, addressing me by my last name, "it's actually a little more complicated than a simple refusal at this stage. You see, your brother, Mark, acting with power of attorney." My blood turned to ice. Power of attorney? A memory surfaced, hazy, dismissed at the time. About a year ago, when I was laid up for weeks with a badly broken leg after a fall from a horse, Mark had come to visit. He'd had some papers with him. He'd said it was just a formality, something to do with managing a small shared inheritance from a distant aunt who had passed. He'd said it would be easier if he could sign for me on that one specific, minor issue, given my immobility. He'd been so casual, so helpful. I trusted him. I'd signed without reading the fine print, my mind fogged with pain and medication. The casualness of it, the calculated deceit, it hit me with the force of a physical blow. My own brother. They had used it. They had gone behind my back, using that fraudulently obtained authority to initiate the sale. My family. The world tilted. The betrayal was so complete, so breathtakingly cruel, it literally stole my breath. They had lied, manipulated, and conspired to steal my life from under me. The argument that followed was ugly, raw, and filled with a pain so deep I thought it would tear me apart. I called them thieves, traitors, vultures. They hurled back accusations of selfishness, of ingratitude, of being stuck in the past. The developers sat through it all, looking uncomfortable but utterly unmoved, their eyes fixed on the prize. In the end, overwhelmed, confused by legal threats and jargon I barely understood, and crushed by the sheer weight of their treachery, they somehow backed me into a corner. They made it clear that refusing to cooperate further would only lead to protracted legal battles I couldn't afford, battles I would likely lose given the power of attorney. The ink from my pen on that final contract felt like it was drawn directly from my veins. The Double R Ranch, my sanctuary, my grandfather's dream, my very identity was gone. They left that night, radiating smug satisfaction, leaving me a hollowed-out man in a house that no longer felt like home. The silence that descended was the loudest sound I'd ever heard, filled only with the echoes of my world shattering around me. The days immediately after were a desolate fog of grief and a cold, diamond-hard rage that began to crystallize deep within me. My family, naturally, was jubilant. Mark called, his voice oozing false concern, to make sure I was, as he put it, handling things okay. He couldn't resist reminding me of the fantastic new chapter that awaited me, all thanks to their brilliant foresight. Sarah sent a text message filled with heart symbols and chirpy pronouncements about how this would ultimately bring the family closer together. Closer? They had just performed open-heart surgery on me with a rusty knife and sold the organ to the highest bidder. They wasted no time flaunting their anticipated riches. Shiny new cars appeared in their driveways almost overnight. Their social media feeds, which I forced myself to look at just once, became a vulgar parade of expensive dinners, designer clothes, and talk of exotic holidays. They reveled in their ill-gotten gains, completely oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the devastation they had wrought. They wrote me off, I'm sure, as a broken man, a sad relic of a past they had successfully shed. But here's the part they never knew. Here's the secret I nursed like a fragile, vengeful ember in the ashes of my old life. My grandfather, for all his love of the raw, untamed land, was also a man of immense foresight and caution. He'd fought his own battles with greedy developers and land speculators decades before, and he'd learned. Buried deep within the original deeds of the RR, and reinforced by certain obscure but legally binding local environmental bylaws I had spent quiet evenings over many years meticulously researching and understanding, were specific covenants and restrictions. Most importantly, there was an old, almost forgotten protected riparian easement along the entire length of the creek, the very creek that snaked right through the heart of what would be their prime development area. Furthermore, a rare species of migratory songbird had been documented nesting along that creek for generations. This was a fact I had personally re-verified, photographed, and submitted with extensive documentation to the relevant state and federal environmental protection agencies just months before my family's final, devastating betrayal. It was a quiet act of foresight, a shield I hoped I'd never need to deploy. When those developers Henderson and Davies, egged on by my avaricious family, had performed their due diligence, they had clearly been sloppy, arrogant, or both. Mark, blinded by the glitter of his impending commission and his own inflated sense of business acumen, had undoubtedly assured them it was all clean, all straightforward. They probably dismissed the easement as a minor historical footnote, easily circumvented, and were likely completely unaware of the freshly reinforced protected status of the birds. In my profound devastation and cold, burning fury, I said nothing. I let them bulldoze my home. I let them dance on the grave of my heritage. I took the paltry sum they condescendingly allocated to me from the sale, a mere fraction of what the land represented to me, packed a single worn duffel bag and simply vanished. They probably imagined I'd crawled into a hole somewhere to mourn. And in a way I had. But I also knew something they didn't. The RR ranch, my grandfather's fierce spirit, had one last fight left in it. And I had quietly, carefully loaded the gun. I found a small, anonymous town, took a simple, unassuming job, and I waited. My satisfaction wouldn't come from a messy, emotional confrontation. It would come from observation. Silent, distant, and absolute. It took about 6 months. 6 months of quiet living, of rebuilding a fragile sense of self, all the while keeping a vigilant watch on the news feeds and county planning websites from my old area. Then, one crisp Tuesday morning, I saw it. A small, almost buried headline. Development halted at former RR ranch site due to environmental concerns. My heart didn't just thump, it soared. The article was brief, citing unforeseen ecological complications and newly enforced riparian zone restrictions. Oh, the delicious, exquisite irony. Newly enforced. I knew those restrictions weren't new at all. They were just newly discovered by people too blinded by greed to look closely at what they were buying. Apparently, Henderson and Davies, fueled by my family's impatient desire for their payout, had rushed into site preparation. They'd brought in the heavy machinery, cleared vast swathes of land, coming dangerously close to the protected creek bed. The local environmental protection group, armed with the comprehensive, anonymously supplied evidence packet detailing the historical easement and the critical nesting sites of the protected bird species, had descended upon them with the full, unyielding force of environmental law. Stop work orders were issued immediately. Substantial fines were levied. All those glossy brochures depicting luxury waterfront properties and manicured golf greens suddenly became exhibits in a case of massive incompetence and negligence. And then the beautiful, inevitable cascade began. The developers, Henderson and Davies, now facing catastrophic financial losses and public humiliation, turned their fury and their lawyers squarely on my family. After all, Mark had been their primary point of contact, the one who had repeatedly assured them the land was free of encumbrances, perfectly primed for their grand vision. Lawsuits started flying like angry hornets. The developers sued my family for fraud, for gross misrepresentation, and for the full recovery of their multi-million-dollar initial investment plus damages. My family, who had already gleefully spent a significant portion of their anticipated windfall on upgrading their lifestyles, were thrown into a maelstrom of panic and disbelief. I could almost picture Mark, his usually smug, arrogant face now pale and slick with sweat, trying to stammer explanations to a phalanx of stone-faced corporate lawyers about how he'd somehow overlooked crucial, decades-old land covenants. I imagined my parents, their golden retirement dreams, funded by the sale of my soul, now crumbling into a nightmare of legal fees and potential bankruptcy. Aunt Sarah, who so loved her designer shoes and champagne lunches, must have been watching her world shrink with every legal notice. Their once boastful social media posts dried up, replaced by a deafening, terrified silence. The local news articles grew bolder, more detailed, more damning. One headline screamed, "Local family accused of deception in contentious ranch sale." The life-changing money they had so eagerly grasped had morphed into life-changing, soul-crushing debt. One evening, my cheap burner phone, the one I kept active for just such an eventuality, though I never initiated contact, vibrated on the worn table beside my chair. It was Sarah. Her voice was thin, reedy, laced with a desperate, unconvincing attempt at her old saccharine sympathy. "John," she began, her tone wavering. "Oh John, thank heavens I reached you. You simply won't believe what's happening to us. It's an absolute nightmare. Those awful developers, they're trying to destroy us." I let her talk, a torrent of self-pity and panicked excuses pouring from her. She detailed their mounting legal woes, the public shame, the crushing fear of financial ruin. She painted them as innocent victims, tragically misled. Not once did she utter a word of apology for what they had done to me. Not a single syllable of remorse. When she finally paused, breathless, clearly expecting, what? My assistance? My commiseration? My pity? I kept my voice perfectly level, cold as the creek water in deep winter. "Really, Sarah?" I said. "A nightmare you call it? It sounds an awful lot like consequences to me." A choked silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean by that?" She finally stammered, a tremor of unease in her voice. "I mean," I replied, spacing each word with deliberate, icy precision, "that you all decided to build your castles on stolen ground. Did you genuinely believe the land would just forget? Did you truly think that I would?" I could almost hear the gears grinding in her mind, the first horrifying flicker of a terrible understanding dawning. You knew about these problems?" She whispered, the words barely audible, freighted with dawning horror. I offered no confirmation, no denial. I simply said, "Enjoy watching it all burn down, Sarah. You've all thoroughly earned it." Then I pressed the end call button and calmly blocked her number. My confrontation wasn't a dramatic, tearful showdown in a crowded room. It was the quiet, inevitable turning of the screw, the satisfying click of a perfectly laid trap springing shut. And the payoff? It was the ongoing, agonizing spectacle of their self-inflicted ruin, with me as its sole, appreciative audience. The Double R, my stolen ranch, now sat untouched, a silent, beautiful monument to their greed, its ecological integrity ironically preserved by their own rapacious folly. The complete collapse of my family's fortunes was as swift as it was devastatingly thorough. The developers, fighting for their own corporate survival, were utterly ruthless in their pursuit of every last cent. My family's new, flashy assets, the cars, the remodeled homes, even my parents' long-held city residence, were all sucked into the voracious maw of the legal battles. Mark, who had always prided himself on his business savvy, was publicly and professionally disgraced, exposed as a reckless, incompetent charlatan. He lost his high-flying job, his expensive apartment, and from the whispers that eventually reached me through the attenuated grapevine of distant acquaintances, any shred of respect he might have once commanded. He and my parents were ultimately forced into a humiliating bankruptcy. Sarah, stripped of her luxuries and social standing, reportedly ended up in a tiny, bleak rented room, a stark contrast to the glittering life she had envisioned for herself. The family unit, once so tightly bonded by their shared conspiracy against me, shattered completely under the immense pressure of blame, recrimination, and financial desolation. They turned on each other like starving wolves, their greed now curdled into bitter resentment. As for the Double R Ranch, it remained in legal limbo for some time, a toxic, unsellable property. The grand development project was dead on arrival, a monument to arrogance and oversight. Eventually, after all the lawsuits concluded and the dust settled, a consortium of environmental conservation groups, greatly empowered by the now very public and legally reinforced ecological protections, managed to acquire the land. They purchased it for a mere fraction of its inflated development value. Today, it's the heart of a much larger nature preserve. The creek runs clear and wild, the ancient pines whisper their secrets to the wind, and those rare songbirds whose existence my family so callously disregarded, return each spring to nest in peace, their songs echoing through the valley. In a strange, circular way, the ranch orchestrated its own salvation, with a little quiet help from its devoted, ousted steward. It wasn't the future I had dreamed of for it. I had dreamed of living out my days there, of passing it on with my own hands, but knowing it is protected, wild, and forever free from the grasping hands of greed brings a profound, if bittersweet, peace. I never went back. I couldn't. I built a new life for myself, far away from the wreckage of my past. It's a smaller life, a quieter one. I own a modest piece of land, nothing like the vast expanse of the Double R, but it's mine, bought and paid for with honest labor. I cultivate a small garden, keep a few chickens. The peace I find here is different from the peace of the ranch. It's a harder-won peace, tinged with the indelible memory of betrayal, but it is genuine. Sometimes, on clear nights, I look up at the star-dusted sky, and I remember the breathtaking canvas of the heavens over the Double R. A pang of loss still echoes, a dull ache that will likely never fully fade. But it's no longer a consuming fire. It's overlaid now with a quiet, almost grim satisfaction. My family, driven by an insatiable, blinding greed, took everything from me, my home, my heritage, my trust. They thought they could erase me, thought they could silence the spirit of that land. But in the end, their own avarice, their own callous actions, became the architect of their spectacular ruin. Karma, I've learned, has a patient, meticulous hand. I didn't need to lift a finger in direct revenge. I merely allowed the inherent truth of the land to assert itself. I simply watched, from a great distance, as they systematically dismantled their own lives. And in their utter downfall, the Double R Ranch found its own enduring, wild salvation. And I, in my own quiet way, found a measure of mine.